Hey guys, I had a few spare minutes today and thought I'd put together a video about a character that I feel is somewhat underrated, and that is Black Widow. She's a little bit difficult to get the handle on, and we're going to talk about why that is. And before though, let's just get a quick overview of this character. So if you look at her stats, they're all pretty average. None of them are as high or as low as they could be. Um, Her traits, she has the electric shock trait, so her weapons can be enhanced with shock element. Her skills have several tags. She has covering fire with a projectile tag. That's a rapid fire skill. She has a shock skill, Widow's Kiss, with an energy and shock tag. Her third skill, Widowmaker, that's her grenades. It's an explosive skill with an energy tag. And then Widow's Bite is a slam attack, and that has an energy and shock tag. And then the other thing to be aware of is that all of her basic attacks are melee tagged. Although they can be shock enhanced, by default they're melee tagged. Alright, since we've taken a look at her tags, let's look at the ISO I recommend. If you're running mainly boss rifts, I would say go with 6 of the increased damage to enemies, 1 HP regen every 10 seconds, and 1 damage resistance. If you're running in story mode, I would replace one of those damage to enemies with a decreased number of attacks needed to inflict status effect. And we'll look at why that is in a moment. I really like that. And if you don't have that many increased damage to enemies, some good options are increased damage 34% when EP is 50% or less, increased energy 9.8%, increased damage to skills with shock attribute, and increased damage to skills with an ability attribute. And those last two will buff everything except for your gunfire and grenades, and your basics are conditional. If they're shock enhanced, then they will be buffed, and if not, they won't. The only exceptions to these things is if you're running the last couple of gauntlets going for multiple stars, throw on some more damage resistance and give up some of the damage to enemies. Okay, now that we got the intro out of the way, let's just take a look at what she looks like in game. And the first skill I'm going to talk about is Widow's Bite. That is her slam. You're going to see me using that a lot. And I am using the decreased number of attacks it takes to inflict a status effect. And the reason I like that ISO so much is if you put one of those on, one Widow's Bite will generally incapacitate enemies, even elites. So what I find is the most effective way to use Black Widow in story mode or when there's non-boss enemies around is to open up with that Widow Bite slam, like you just saw me do there. Turns off any kind of auras around enemies or anything like that. Incapacitates them, turns all your attacks into critical hits, and then I just usually take the enemies out with basic attacks to recharge my EP and keep rolling. Now she has a couple of self synergies. You just saw one there and there again, and we'll talk about those in a minute. I won't talk about the rest of her skills real quick first, but her other skills. Covering fire is her gunshot. You just saw me use there. It's nice for getting people that are just a little out of reach. You don't want to walk over there, and it's really handy on enemies like Supergiant, and she gets that confusion cloud around her, and you just don't want to get close to her. You can still do some damage at range. I would say be careful not to run yourself completely out of EP. I like to always have enough to slam and incapacitate enemies so I can recharge, because that is kind of what I found to be the trick to playing her effectively. Widow's Kiss is a good skill, but it is very situational. That's the one where she lunges forward with her shock batons and delivers a multi-stage shock. You'll see me use it on Kingpin here in a minute. And then Widowmaker is her grenades, and those are the secret to her self-synergy. So both of her self-synergies, you open up with Widowmaker, the grenades. Then there you saw me use Widow's Bite with the slam. Here you're seeing me follow Widowmaker grenades up with Widow's Kiss, which is that lunge forward I was telling you about. So the first one of those, the Widow's Maker with the Widow's Bite Slam, that gives you that nice big AoE devastation. I use that on bosses that are not staggered or are in what I would say that are dangerous. That's what I'm using here. Um, it's got great AoE clear, great damage, does a decent amount of stagger. And then the other one is the Widowmaker plus Widow's Kiss. That one you'll see me use from behind Kingpin here in a moment once he's staggered. It is great for staggered bosses or bosses that are channeling an ability. When you're not afraid to really commit to getting in there. Usually will give you a couple of synergy bursts, does a good amount of damage, and really takes that health bar down. So that's the two self synergies she has. Um, her other skills are great too. Her basics and the one attack in particular that I will take a moment just to mention. I think it's worth talking about is her heavy attack. It doesn't do necessarily a particularly large amount of damage, but if you hold the block button, you can actually spam that fast enough to where it adds up rather quickly, and also it does a fairly significant amount of stagger damage. So hold that block button, hit the heavy attack. I like to walk around right behind enemies and just kick them in the rear with that thing as quickly as possible. And I've had some really good success with that approach. And generally, it seems that the AI has a little bit of a difficulty targeting you when you're in that close, and it makes it a lot easier to dodge too. Because once they turn to face you, you can just dash in a direction, walk up behind them again, and start kicking them from another direction. And anyway, because she stays stationary, I just really enjoy that skill a lot. And when you use the block button with it, I find it extremely effective. Um, so I always have to run the Ultimate Alliance of Evil Rift with these guys, and so I didn't put the full run in here this time just because I always do that, and I felt like it's getting a little repetitive. So, but for the end of the video here, got it. They made it through in about 5 minutes and 20 some odd seconds. Now a big part of that was thanks to the rest of this comp. Got Luke Cage, Hulk, and Ghost Rider. Lots of synergy with Black Widow's skills and with each other. And this was just a particularly good run as well. Made it through, like I said, 5 minutes, 20 some odd seconds. The more typical run was around 5 minutes and 45 seconds. And like I said, it's just a good comp altogether with Black Widow. Well, I hope you guys found this helpful, and I will talk to you next time.